Controversial rapper and actor Tupac Shakur has died in a Las Vegas hospital.
Rap star Biggie Smalls, the notorious B.I.G., was shot dead by a drive-by gunman.
Someone had had enough of seeing this, and there was an anonymous letter sent to law enforcement saying, these guys are living like drug dealers.
Yo can't wait till he's just gone for good, so they can fully breathe a sigh of relief.
He's dead. That person's dead. And everybody feels comfortable with the fact of that. When I say everybody, I mean whoever set it up.
They're not gonna rest until Suge Knight is dead or in jail.
It was a setup.
Could you please state your full name for the record?
Yes, Tupac Amaru Shakur. I started off with poetry, writing poetry. But
like junior high, high school?
Yes,
okay.
Junior high school. And poets I saw were like looked on as like wimps. So I did that personally, but then I started turning the poetry into songs.
From the moment that I met Tupac at the age of 17, he was one of the most startling individuals I've ever met. He was, and still is, just one of the most amazing voices. I love Pac instantly.
It's how you raised. We weren't raised barricaded, although the FBI was always lurking around and all of that, but you still went about your business. The kids still played outside. When they came upstairs and ate dinner. The only lock on the door was your police bar in New York and your little lock. But you weren't standing at the window with guns. That's not what his life was. It may have been others, but it wasn't his.
He became like my little brother, actually. I work with many different artists, but he's the guy who invites you to your home, you know, who you talk to, you know, late at night. He was just very easy to know for me. I kind of feel like he was that way with many more people, which is why he's so missed, because when people met him, they really got a chance to get a piece of him.
Months and months I kept talking about needing a young artist that had a voice that could translate and cross all boundaries.
Tupac was one of those guys who said what was on his mind.
Plenty of days a night, the brother, he kept a smile on us, we kept joking. He was one of them guys that had a personality that he wasn't always serious, you know what I mean? He could be going through the worst things in court and things like that, facing the worst things in his world, but he always kept a smile on his face. He always, you know, he always kept us laughing.
It is of my opinion that I was rapping while I was writing poetry.
Okay.
And so I was into rap, I guess you could say, from junior high when I wrote my first poem.
I fought a lot of people around me, because Pac, when he was so young, he was already a contradiction in so many ways, externally and internally, and he lived out loud. So nothing surprised me. He was so in your face.
Pac really down to earth. He was a good dude. He had good intentions, you know what I mean? It's just that, unfortunately, sometimes in these streets, it can mislead us and have us going the wrong way, you know?
A lot of people nowadays like to say Tupac was loyal, but Tupac was really only loyal to Tupac. He was loyal to what he wanted.
What my and Pac's friendship and love was about making shit happen.
If you could ride with that, he was fine with it. But if it was something that you couldn't ride with, he would move on. Or if you did something he didn't like, or if you didn't give him the attention that he thought he needed at that particular time, he was done with you. He might just be done with you for the night, but he was done with you at least for that night. And then he may reconsider the next morning and you guys would be fine. But that's just how Tupac was.
Mm-hmm. And after I heard on the radio that there were other poets who made records and they were selling and it was working, then I decided to change the method of my poetry.
We had Los Angeles police officers working within the organization, Compton police officers working within inside the organization. Their badges stopped us from getting to the truth.
No one is above the law. This is a fundamental principle in our society. And when it is violated, it's the job of the Department of Justice to step in and hold individuals accountable.
The 51-year-old deputy chief is now facing federal charges of selling drugs. 3 drugs in particular: oxycodone, heroin, and marijuana.
In a 3-year investigation, which San Francisco police officers have been indicted. All the officers were put on administrative assignment, taken off of any street. Certain officers, because of the seriousness of the allegation, were disarmed.
And unfortunately, in this particular case, we had to take 3 police officers who were sworn to uphold public safety off the street. From my point of view, I'm battling the Mexican cartels in Chicago. Now I got to worry about this. Now I got to worry about this. Now I got to worry about this. Now I got to worry about this.
Turn it off. I just enjoyed the fringe benefits that came with a credential. Nightlife, the party life, the rubbing elbows with the powerful in Juarez and Chihuahua. When I was with the feds, there was this, one guy. This happened after the Pablo Acosta incident. We were doing a job. One of the other agents had a case and we were called in to help him. And we went into this house, real nice house. I turn around, there's a bag, a paper bag, grocery bag. And I look into it and there was piles of money in it. And inside that same bag, there was many bags of ounces of cocaine. If I would have been smart, I would have kept it. But that wasn't my, that wasn't my thing. It was share alike. So I gave that money to the person in charge of that job. And some other agents were sent wrecking, they were taking everything. They were stealing everything. And the person I gave the money to stole the money. He never reported it. So I came back home that night. I get a knock. And I walk out and it was 2 of the commandant's right hands. The commander found out about the money and they turned around and blamed me for it. I was tortured. The same thing we did to the criminals was done to me. And the one pointing the finger, blaming me, was that same guy that was taking everything from the house. As I was, the first time as they tied my hands, my face, giving me water, shocks. When they started beating me up, the commander was accusing me of being a DEA agent working in Mexico. That was the only time I had that problem. This was the commander talking. The first night I went in there, they asked me, where's the money? I gave the money to him. The guy gave the money and said, no, you didn't. And since he was the commander's right hand, he believed him more than me. So they took me into his office. They handcuffed my hands. They tied my legs. They put me on the ground. They shoved the rag up my mouth. They put a handkerchief on my face and gave me the water treatment, mineral water with pepper powder. My father gave $20-some thousand to him. They called me, they pulled me out of the cell. And he took me into an office, and the commander turned around and he cursed at me for a while. And he turned around and told my father, I tortured him. Ain't shit he can do about it. I was pretty messed up. It was after 30 days, my face was swollen, my body was hurting. My bad beard, my hair was all messed up. I remember crossing the bridge and the guy at the port of entry just looked at me and said, you okay? What's wrong with you? Nothing, kept walking.
In the mid-1980s, the cocaine trade had sort of shifted from Miami, because a lot of law enforcement there, to Los Angeles. As the volume of cocaine cases and frankly the volume of cocaine per case started to grow and grow, the sheriff's departments selected some of their best narcotics officers to be what they called their majors crews to go after the big, significant, large-scale narcotics distributors.
The majors units at the LA Sheriff's Department were Majors 1, Majors 2, Majors 3, and Majors 4. Operation Big Spender was an epic announcement to discover and ferret out and punish corruption by elite law enforcement officers.
It started because some of these sheriff's deputies who were putting their lives on the line every day, as they would seize money, they at some point came up with the idea of taking a little bit of the money to try to get better equipment to help them do their jobs. Over time, it morphed into maybe people were going to lunch that day from the unit, so they would take some of the money from the kitty, as they called it, and they'd use it for lunch. And then a little later on, it might be the weekend, and they were all going out, and it's like, hey, let's take a little money from the kitty for when we go out.
Here's a good example. The time we took the Armenians down, and we have $1 million in cash in 5s, 10s, and 20s spread through all of our desks. They wouldn't let us use the money counter, so we had to do it by hand. We ordered pizza, and so we're all digging in our pockets, trying to come up with enough to pay the pizza guy, and he's looking at us like we're crazy because here's $1 million spread out all over these tables.
And then before you know it, as time progresses on, and certainly by the time of the majors teams, forget the kitty. When we seize money, let's just take some.
The predication came from drug dealers.
Later on, we find out that not only had they been planting drugs on my guys, but they had been planting drugs and lying on the witness stand and fabricating search warrants for a lot of other people.
Too many drug dealers came forward and spoke to officials and created a buzz where similar, if not identical, scenarios of, hey, it's all the same to me, but just so you know, they reported $50,000 seized from me. I had $100,000 in cash.
They basically put away the gang thing and became people that had organizations, and like Whitey's World, Way Out World, World on Wheels, Cobra Enterprises. These were all African-American gang members that had narcotic organizations that made millions of dollars.
A bunch of my guys have been getting drugs planted on them when they didn't have no drugs, when they wasn't selling drugs, and I wanted to find out who these cops were that was doing this.
Ricky Ross was a legendary drug dealer, but so were a lot of people in LA.
They was taking the drugs from one person, planting them on another person and selling them to this person, and just a criminal enterprise.
Sometimes it happened invisibly to the drug dealer, but sometimes it happened right out in the open, where a seeming confidence had developed among the detectives. Nobody's going to believe this person.
At some point in, I think, 1988, someone had had enough of seeing this, and there was an anonymous letter sent to law enforcement saying, these guys are living like drug dealers. You need to check them out. They're spending money like drug dealers, they have money like drug dealers, and they're living the life of drug dealers. That led to a lengthy and exhaustive investigation culminating in a sting where they actually had a wired up, videoed up hotel room with plant alleged drug money in, I think, 1989, and they actually caught members of the Majors 2 sheriff's unit stealing money.
Thieves doing the thieving live before your eyes.
Yeah, taking a 20, nobody had ever known, but it was something that, in me, that I would have never been able to sleep. I would have been waiting for them to come and knock on my door and take me away for taking $20 from a dirtbag dope dealer with $1 million.
The sergeant on that crew, a guy named Robert or Bob Sobel, wound up flipping or cooperating, and then he testified in the first trial, and because of the information he gave and later others, the investigation spread to the other major narcotics crews.
You didn't have to do very much persuasion that there was something rotten here, because you can see it, as well as study financial records. You could see thievery occur.
On the one hand, you have Operation Big Spender and the Los Angeles County Sheriffs being prosecuted, and on the other side of the fence, you have the city of Compton.
Of course, it's not uncommon. You can take any large city or medium city or a relatively small city like Compton with a population of approximately 100,000, and you're going to be able to identify in its historical record there was corruption.
There were no lines that people with power in Compton were unwilling to cross to defend their power. No legal lines, no moral lines, no ethical lines. I just found that it was the Wild West.
Virtually every town that has a 19th century origins in Southern California started out as small agricultural colonies. But Compton was unique in that it was early on the settlers decided to incorporate. Los Angeles at the turn of the century is an emerging city. It's still not even in the top 100 cities of the United States in terms of population, but it's on the make. And just south of Compton is Long Beach.
These families have been here 40, 50, 60 years. And so everyone knows everyone. You know, if you got caught breaking into somebody's house in the neighborhood, you got a problem. If you stole from somebody in the neighborhood, you got a problem. And if you were from outside of the neighborhood, they're gonna check you out until you leave here.
So for African Americans coming from South Central Los Angeles, which was increasingly congested and deteriorated housing, for those middle class African Americans, they viewed Compton as nirvana. And whites are moving en masse so quickly, I refer to it rather than white flight as white exodus. By 1970, Compton is an African American majority community, and by the early 70s, the first community this side of the Mississippi River entirely run politically and administratively by African Americans.
So there's not a neighborhood that we're going to go into, be it Crip or Piru, that if they see my face, they're not going to stop and say, Omar, Omar.
Compton, through the 70s and 80s and 90s, enters a really trying, challenging, difficult era. You had whites move out, and they took their businesses with them. So the tax base, with all of the banks gone, in fact, downtown Compton is bulldozed. As that happens, the infrastructure of the city begins to decline.
Now these rough streets are because I'm no longer mayor.
Now, you introduce a cheap drug, crack cocaine, that with a rudimentary gang structure, that if it expands and becomes business-oriented in an underground economy, can make a hell of a lot of money.
I was captain of the fucking football team, AB student, magnet. Shit, we out there getting it. Fucking with this nigga and my brother, so we have a super long ring, it's ridiculous. I ain't having no problem. 450 SL, niggas in the 10th grade.
And for kids that can't find jobs otherwise in schools that are deteriorating, they're having trouble staying in schools, you can make quick money, a lot of money, if you do the selling of drugs connected to gangs.
I sold drugs because I was running from poverty. I didn't like being poor and broke. You know, I didn't like not having food in the refrigerator. And I didn't like for the light man to be talking about cutting my mom's lights off.
Suge Knight was a very powerful individual. He had connections with the Compton mayor, and he had access to just about the entire Blood gang.
Death Row Records. Death Row Records.
Death Row.
Death Row. Death Row Records.
Death Row.
Death Row.
Death Row Records.
This is Michael Harris, a man drug agents describe as a major cocaine trafficker.
Yeah, I knew Michael Harris. Yeah, he was trying to put together his wife's album, and matter of fact, we were cellies at the time.
Harris, identifying himself as original organizer and owner, names him as an equal partner in Death Row.
I told him that he should have Dr. Dre produce a song for him. And that's how his thing with the Suge and the Dre and all started transpiring. I met Suge in MDC.
Harris's complaint also names criminal defense attorney David Kenner as the company general counsel and organizer.
Harry-O and a couple other guys in there that was running for David Kenner. You know, that was their game. You hire David Kenner, then they get a kickback. I was there when he first told Kenner about the music business as well. Harry-O told David Kenner that he would make him more money in the music business than he ever made doing law.
What's up, boy? What's going on, homie? Doing a documentary.
Corruption exacerbated things as prominent political figures were identified, often with a federal investigation of corruption on a variety of charges. You had some high-ranking people like U.S. Representative Tucker taking some bribes from a company, I think it was a rubbish company or a reclamation company that was come into Compton and given favored status, and the FBI investigated, and then over a course of time found guilty.
Does City Council meet in August?
No.
And yet our producer found that you were being paid in August.
Probably so.
Why so?
Tradition.
I mean, just to be honest, I was really naive. I have worked in politics at a lot of different levels. I have worked in the White House. I've worked on 5 presidential campaigns. I'd been a deputy mayor. I'd been on the State Board of Education. Worked on a number of mayoral campaigns and gubernatorial campaigns. I had never encountered politics like I encountered in Compton.
Ben Austin worked in the White House, so he's seen politics of all kinds. They've got to be pretty bad.
Our research shows in 2012, the City Council members earned $39,000 each for serving on 4 commissions, which met for a total of 26 hours. That shakes out to $1,500 per hour.
Compton was just the Wild West, and there were simply no rules. There were no lines that people of power in Compton were unwilling to cross to defend their power. No legal lines, no moral lines, no ethical lines. I just found that it was the Wild West.
What commissions are you on?
All of them.
Do you have a favorite?
A favorite? No.
Well, what's one of them?
I'm just serving on the ones that's on the books. So that's, it was CRA, it was public finance, you caught me by.
In nearby Huntington Park, council members make less than $15,000 a year. Ditto over in Maywood, the politicians there make about $6,700 a year. And in affluent Huntington Beach, council members earn about $16,000.
And the rules of engagement, the normal rules of engagement, do not apply.
Do they do anything?
Well, they listen to the audience comments, and then they may comment on that.
And then they decide something? It's just...
There's nothing to decide.
So the people that came into power hired their cousins and their uncles and others into the jobs, especially in the school district, right, which was the largest employer for city residents. But in 1993, the state does something unprecedented. It takes over the Compton School District. State had never done that before.
School board president announced during a debate about this that we just need to accept that all children are not going to succeed.
All kids are not going to make it.
That's just the opening salvo. That was their basic premise from which they were operating. And everything else flows from there.
And the board, sometimes we don't even know what's going on.
I mean, the words that were spoken in Compton.
I gave you your 5 minutes. There would be no more speaking.
And the actions that were taken were, in my mind, in an alternate universe. And like I said, I had come there having worked in the White House and on 5 presidential campaigns.
All kids are not going to make it.
And I had never seen anything like this.
Adult issues are important.
So you have, in that period of the late 80s through the late 90s, this mountain of scandals in the school district, in City Hall, in the representatives to Congress from the city.
I was at an education conference in San Diego, and I saw across the hall the former superintendent of Compton. He just happened to be there. I remember it was yesterday. He turns to me and he says, "You're a crazy motherfucker." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And he said, "Well, when I was superintendent of Compton, the mayor called me one day and said that I needed to sell a parcel of land to a developer friend of his. And he said, you know, that he refused, that he wasn't going to do it." So soon after that, a school caught on fire. And a couple of days, a week later, another school catches on fire. And then it happens again. And so he called the fire chief, or the police chief, I don't remember which. And he said, "When is this gonna stop? What's going on here? We got a huge problem." And he said, "The fires will stop when the mayor says the fires will stop." They were essentially doing this eyes wide open. They'd done a report on themselves. They learned that the schools were not performing well because of affirmative decisions they were making and didn't make any changes. And that was, for me, a real poster child for an educational system that is fundamentally designed to serve the needs of adults, not the needs of children.
Adult issues are important.
Kids in McKinley are 50 times more likely to drop out of school than to go to college. Right. I mean, that's a huge concern, and especially for these parents that want their kids to succeed like any parent does. And so first thing, they wanted to get their kids out of this school district.
I founded an organization called Parent Revolution, and we invented a new law called the Parent Trigger Law. The law says that if half the parents at a failing school sign a petition, they can bring in new staff, they can bring in new leadership, they can convert their school to a charter school, or they can use the law as leverage to bargain. But it wasn't until we turned the petitions in on December 7th that the blowback really began. They mapped the networks of the school and figured out the children of the parents who signed the petition. And for the children of the parents who signed the petition, and these are elementary school kids, they wouldn't let the children, when they were at school, they wouldn't let them go to the bathroom. They forced the children to pee in their pants, and when they did, they were sent to the nurse's office, and the nurse was in charge of the rescissions. And so the nurse would call in the mom to bring clean underwear in, and as the mom was changing their child's underwear, the nurse would ask her to sign a rescission petition.
And I just want to make this statement. When Omar had the city with a surplus, had the murder rate drop from 100 a year down to 20 by bringing in the sheriff and getting rid of the corrupt Compton PD.
And now we see that the corruption that's passed from the city government and the corruption that's infected the schools is now passing its way down to the Compton Police Department. But you have to ask yourself this question. The entire Compton Police Department was disbanded. What does it take to disband an entire police department?
In order to disband an entire police department, things have to be so bad and so corrupt that there's no other alternative, such as maybe bringing in a new police chief, new police administration, or something of that nature.
They envied Compton streets when I was mayor. I used to get on the radio and laugh at them because they couldn't figure out my formula.
It has happened on occasion where the entire municipality has been dissolved. The bottom line is things have to be pretty bad before that happens.
I had personal interaction with them working the gang detail from 84 to 90. We didn't share a lot of information with them because of the city government was known to be corrupt, and the police department had a stigma of not being on the up and up. It was like shoveling sand against the tide.
You'd hear over and over again that the Compton cops were on the payrolls of the gangs. Initially, when the word that cops were working for Suge was out, was that basically they were providing intelligence. But also when cops, when there'd be a clear street and there wouldn't be any cops around.
And one of the things that the former mayor of Compton, Omar Bradley, told us was that there actually wasn't a difference between Death Row Records and the city of Compton.
They've always been the same entity. That's what you don't get. The city attorney's nephew or cousin is Snoop Dogg. The city manager's son is A&R. The head of homicide's son is vice president, head of security. The other chief of police that I bring in to replace Yuri, his daughter got $1 million contract with Death Row.
They reached out to the Los Angeles County Sheriffs to see if the sheriffs would be interested in policing Compton.
In police work, in law enforcement, there is so much duplication of services. They overlap, and a lot of times eliminating a police department really doesn't harm the public because another department can come in and take care of it.
The way this actually worked was the FBI walked into Omar Bradley's office one day because a Long Beach police officer had been shot with a gun that had flowed through the Compton police evidence locker. And so the FBI wanted to know if Omar Bradley was in on it. And Omar Bradley said, "I don't know what you're talking about." And that led to an investigation into the Compton corruption that was happening. When they start this investigation, they come in and they find the evidence locker is just a mess. The inventory hasn't been done in years and years and years. And Chief Ori Taylor is suspended.
A group of those cops, sort of an elite group of those cops, were actually like a criminal gang.
And we're not talking about just casual trips down to the locker. We're talking about 172 unaccounted for visits.
And they ask Ori Taylor if they can start looking into the lockers, and Ori Taylor is pacing back and forth. "Oh, I don't think I have a key, and I don't think the key's around." And he seems like he's nervous and he's upset. And so the investigator pulls out bolt cutters and just cuts off the lock to Ori Taylor's locker. And inside they find 2 kilos of cocaine in the police chief's personal locker. And Ori Taylor all of a sudden decides he doesn't want to be there, and he leaves the police station.
And Ori Taylor gestures to his attorney as he's running up the back stairs to follow him up there, and that's the last they see of Ori Taylor.
Cases were being rejected by the DA's office, and the Compton police were actually keeping the evidence. And a lot of that evidence was being kept in the evidence locker, and then when they actually go to look for the evidence, it's missing. Compton was a very corrupt city, and the police were trafficking narcotics, using the evidence locker as their warehouse.
So that's how they pay them. But you gotta understand, we give you the dope, you give us a business deal. So our money looks good because our money's coming off this business deal. But where's their money coming from? Coming from the dope coming out the evidence line. And the guns, 2,300 guns missing. 140 gallons of PCP.
I mean, money laundering is if you take drug money and you go buy a car, you just laundered that money. If you go buy clothes, you just laundered that money. That's a small scale.
They started calling people in one at a time. Nobody was taking the rap for what was happening and all the corruption, and they were blaming other people. There was an awful lot of finger pointing. They were also trafficking in stolen guns, and a lot of those guns were going into the evidence locker and then finding their way over to a gun shop in Compton.
City clerk, he owns part of the gun shop. ATF, FBI, Homeland Security,
And Baca.
All went, 400 people went in there to get all them guns out. They had to bring up a big rig to get all the shit together.
There's no coincidence that the Compton police corruption report happened at the exact same time that we had the Rampart scandal. And so you have this pattern that includes actually the DA's office in the missing cocaine, but nothing ever happens. And you have an assistant district attorney who refuses to prosecute Horry Taylor, but then turns around and is the one that was pursuing Omar Bradley the entire time Omar Bradley had his corruption trial, which was eventually overturned. But even after it was overturned, the assistant district attorney kept pursuing Omar Bradley.
Within 3 years after Omar Bradley is defeated as mayor and Eric Perrodin takes over, fellow prosecutor Terry Bork presses charges against Omar Bradley for corruption as it applies to credit card charges. Yet when those same credit card charges that are made by Eric Perrodin are presented to Terry Bork with the question as to whether or not that's actually corruption, Terry Bork says that even if he found that those credit card charges were corruption, he would not prosecute Eric Perrodin.
Reggie Wright Sr. is in charge of narcotics at the Compton Police Department. And so they bring him in for questioning. And Reggie Wright Sr. Immediately starts talking about how, you know, even though he's the man that's in charge and the responsibility really stops with him, that he doesn't ever make any decisions. And so they really shouldn't be looking at him. They should be looking at the guy under him and the guy over him. Everybody is pointing to other people to blame for the malfeasance that was going on in the department.
Now, it looks like the time in the Compton police report that Reggie Wright Sr. was actually in charge of both the narcotics and the gang units was about a year. But prior to that, he had been in charge of the gangs. And who deals the drugs? The gangs.
The Compton Police Corruption Report is a 95-page document. So when it was decided that they were going to shut down the Compton Police Department, a lawsuit was filed.
One of the things that struck us immediately was that there was a handful of people in the Compton Police Department that were just not satisfied with the Compton Police Department being closed.
It was heard before a judge. They tried to do everything they could to block this from being shut down. And the judge heard the case, they had their day in court, and the judge allowed them to shut down the Compton Police Department.
Even though Omar Bradley had been successful in shutting down the corrupt Compton Police Department, what do you think was the first priority on Eric Perrodin's agenda? Restarting the Compton PD.
The whole notion of I am my brother's keeper doesn't exist over here. This is dog eat dog.
So what you have here is a real dilemma for the Compton Police Department because it's sort of like a vice. On the one hand, you have the Operation Big Spender and the sheriffs and everybody that's surrounding the city of Compton being investigated for corruption as it relates to the drug trade. And on the other side of it, you have the Justice Department and the Drug Enforcement Agency coming down on Death Row Records and looking at Death Row Records for money laundering as it relates to drug sales. So where is in the middle? The Compton Police Department.
I was approached by the FBI and ATF about a year afterwards, while I was working with Death Row Records in regards to racketeering within Death Row Records, and also at that time, the mayor of Compton, Omar Bradley. Some other things that occurred within the city. I didn't know that the FBI at that time was following Reggie, Suge, the homeboys, and that's how things started out with the FBI.
He really was not that street person. He didn't understand the street's value.
At 24, Tupac Shakur was a platinum-selling artist, the movie star, and an inmate at the Dannemora jail in upstate New York.
And by the time that Tupac Shakur had gone to prison, he had already shot 2 cops in the city of Atlanta. The charges were dropped against him, but he'd still shot cops. So he was no favorite with law enforcement.
That's just plain out period. Don't come to jail. I'm telling you straight up. This ain't the spot. It's dirty, it's filthy, it's like you an animal. And it's just not the spot. No man don't want to be here. No man or woman wants to be here.
Pac is now in Dannemora. Everybody is visiting him back and forth.
Before the Rikers, after the Rikers, Dannemora, after Dannemora, I mean, I visited him. I took a trip. One day I was like, I gotta go to New York and see Pac.
And I think also that Tupac got it in his mind that he needed someone to protect him. Now, that again isn't true, that he needed someone to protect him, because Watani had a group of people, had always put a group of people around him to look out for him. The reason things happened to Tupac is Tupac would step outside of that group. If people put a group of people around you to look out for you, you need to stay inside that group. You don't need to step out and create new alliances with people that you don't know.
I got a phone call that Death Row had went to visit Tupac, and that I think he's signing with Suge.
The whole kind of Death Row thing is Tupac wanted to go to Death Row. What he told me face to face, as close as we were sitting, is I want to go to Death Row because I want to record with Dre and Snoop. He said to me, you can make the phone call or I'll have someone make the phone call. And I think Watani and I were both there at Dannemora talking to him at the time and told him, you don't need to do that. There's no reason to do that. You're #1 on the charts. Your record's outselling anybody at this particular time. All Death Row is Interscope. You don't need to go to Death Row.
Pac worked 24/7.
Because I knew he was gonna end it. This was just a means. He had to get out of jail, and he wanted his mom to have a house, and he would do those 3 albums. And after those 3 albums were done, the house is paid for. What is he gonna do? Because he had other ambitions.
At the time, Suge wasn't letting anyone work with Dre or Snoop unless they were part of Death Row.
In those months, in those last 9 months of his life, he had the kind of desperation that I talked about earlier. The only thing that mattered was to make a difference.
Thug life is like the 12th grade. Some people graduate from high school and don't seek to do anything else.
His lifestyle on video and on tape and even on song looked like a party. It wasn't a party, it wasn't a gangster party, it wasn't a party at all.
You have to remember, Tupac was out on bail. And the reason that he was rushing to get as many songs done as he could was because he wasn't sure that that bail wouldn't be revoked at some point and that he may actually go back to prison.
He was not a gangster. Not one day in his life, not even the day in the MGM when he stomped whoever the hell that was on the floor.
I was in a limo, me and Tupac, Outlaw Immortals. We were driving around in Harlem, and the radio came on with Snoop Dogg saying that he had no beef with New York, which sent Pac into a rage.
And at that time, the artist at the height of that whole forefront was Snoop. How the fuck did that feel?
Cause I am the LBC. I'm the king of Long Beach, nigga. I made it fashionable for niggas to bang the dub. I made it universal, motherfucker. I'm the nigga that took the set around the whole globe.
23-year-old Calvin Brodus, a.k.a. Snoop Doggy Dogg, the man who made gangster rap mainstream, stands accused of murder.
Los Angeles police announced that 21-year-old Calvin Brodus, better known as rap star Snoop Doggy Dogg, had turned himself into police on Friday, along with 2 other young black men, all accompanied by an attorney, in connection with the murder on August 25th of a man named Philip Waldemariam, in what police believe was a gang-related shooting.
We, the jury in above entitled action, find the defendant, Calvin Brodus, not guilty of the crime of murder in the first degree.
Only if David Kennedy just would have had love for me on that level and just did it for me, just not for the paper, but just doing it for the love, because I know that's how he is about me. He's not concerned with the money issue, and you know what I'm saying? And I knew that when he did his closing argument.
You know, we beat a murder trial for him, but then he was on probation. Then he got caught with 2 ounces of marijuana. Then he got caught with guns. And each time it's nothing. They're not gonna violate him. Because for the street guys know what I'm talking about. There's no puzzle. I mean, if you get a guy that constantly getting in trouble and never gonna come to prison, that's because he's an informant. He's a rat, a snitch.
You know, it was Suge and his guys and Tupac and myself. And it was Snoop Dogg and Dre and the Dog Pound. That's how it was on the personal side.
But, you know, that was Pac, man. You cross him, there's no gray area. It's black and white. You cross him, you do something, you screw up, you are out.
Now, since he's not around, everybody claims that they was great friends. Everybody do a show. Some artists knew him, but like Pac and Snoop at the end hated each other. And you could tell that by the simple fact that when Snoop did Dogfather, Pac was not on not one song. And Pac didn't like Dre. That would change the Death Row camp because of the jealousy of Tupac. Because Tupac was all of a sudden now, he's this major star, he getting all the light, he getting all the attention.
I didn't feel nothing from nobody at first. I mean, especially Snoop and Pac came up together. You know, Thug Life and Dog Pound, we like came up together. You know, Thug Life, Murder Was the Case, and I Get Around was the same time we would see each other in traffic. Yeah, you know what I mean? Keep it moving. That might have changed over time because that group of people hadn't been around Pac like we had. So they didn't know how Pac is as a celebrity, as a star. To actually deal with him requires more attention, more time, because he's Pac.
And here's the irony. Tupac left to go to Death Row Records because he wanted to record with Snoop and with Dre. But when he got there, by the time he was done, he didn't like either of them.
Tupac looked at me and said, man, is that how my shit gonna sound? And I'm like, nah, man. Because he's ready to kick a hole in the wall. Told the guy, nah, man, they kicked us out of Can-Am. 6 o'clock this morning, this is the best that Kevin Lewis could do for us. He picks up the phone, he calls the office. He says Snoop was corny, take all day doing one song. He says, I'm paying Nate Dogg child support, Rage. Y'all kick my engineers out the studio so that Rage can continue working on a record that she's been working on for 2 years. That's pretty fucked up. I am paying for this. Why are you guys kicking them out the studio when my record is the #1 record on Billboard? Stuff like that, you know what I'm saying?
So, you know, that to me, you know, was childish on their part, but they can never feel the shoes that Pac feel. I walk into the light of evil.
But in the city of New York on September 4th of 1996, there was a big problem, and that had to do with a radio interview that Snoop Dogg did.
Because she asked me on the air, how do you feel about Puffy and Biggie? And I said what I felt. They're my homeboys, I love them.
Pac, of course, had big beef with New York.
Pac had a beef with New York because he got attacked in 1994 and there was a shot fired, and unfortunately it was self-inflicted.
Snoop was basically saying, hey, I don't have a beef with him. That set Tupac off, and we immediately spun the limo around and we went back to the hotel to confront Snoop. We couldn't find him, but we found Mr. Knight, and that's who Tupac confronted about what was going on the radio while we were in New York. I think Mr. Knight had me stay for the safety of Tupac, because I think Mr. Knight, with me not being there, he would have put his hands on him. He was that upset. And Pac's words were, I'm gonna cut out Machiavelli, and when I cut out Machiavelli, I'm the hell up out of here. You got your money, I don't want nothing else to do with Death Row, I'm out.
And after the major fallout between Suge and Tupac, suddenly Snoop walks back to the hotel.
When I got back to the hotel, it was a whole nother atmosphere, like
perpetuating it so it could be drama, which I still love MTV, but when it all go down, don't look at me and Biggie and be like, why is there a big East Coast, West Coast war?
So when we got on the plane to go back to LA the next day, Suge didn't let none of my security ride with me. I had to ride on the plane with him, his homies, and Pac. And it was the most uncomfortable ride I ever had in my life. In fact, put the blanket on my head, knife in my hand, fork in my hand, and just sleep the rest of the ride.
because I feel like they finna try to do something to me. So I walk down the steps. We meet right here. I'm like, cuz, you going to Vegas?
Why was somebody that wasn't going to Vegas anyway asking Tupac, are you going to Vegas?
He do me like this. Went his way and he went my way.
Apparently, the Long Beach Crips had put out a DVD with a bunch of diss songs and some music videos that dissed the Death Row organization and dissed Suge Knight.
DVD was all about killing Death Row people. You feel me? Now, the DVD was predominantly Long Beach people in it. You feel me? I'm from Long Beach. My whole time that I was on Death Row, I lived right here in Long Beach.
You always saw Pac and Suge hanging together. You always saw these niggas everywhere together. They was like big brother, little brother and shit. And the thing is, that relationship was dangerous for the powers that be.
I remember that. Not the West Coast. I got backlash from Suge Knight, Tupac, and Death Row. And then was our last days hanging out before he got killed. So we ended on a kind of foul note.
The tension between Death Row Records and the Long Beach Crips and the Snoop Dogg Dogg Pound camps was palpable, to the point where Snoop Dogg went to the point of making an entire music video that showed total disrespect for Suge Knight.
Bully got checked, you know what I'm saying? You know how when you in school and you got a bully, and he's scaring everybody and everybody going the other way. Scared putting their lunch money up, hiding their gold chains. Well, this day at school, the bully got checked. He had to put his gold chain in and try to light a cigar. You know, but the media didn't want to bring it off like that because they were scared that Suge was going to do something to him for telling the truth.
Shit go haywire.
Were you in Vegas?
No, we heard about it because they was trying to get us to go to Vegas. And we was like, Dogg Pound, we was really on our fuck Death Row shit, really. You know what I'm saying? We was already saying fuck Death Row.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? Because we know everybody.
And now we have opportunity. The people that need to be in Las Vegas are in Las Vegas, and the people who don't want to be seen in Las Vegas have cleared out.
Cause I am the LBC. I'm the king of Long Beach, nigga. I made it fashionable for niggas to bang the dub. I made it universal, motherfucker. I'm the nigga that took the set around the whole globe. Yeah, that's me.
Tupac hated people, and we were supposed to hate people because Tupac hated them.
In most law enforcement investigations, you find that the first suspects that are looked at are generally wives, girlfriends, significant others, people that would normally have a natural relationship, and you'd actually try to figure out if they were the most logical suspect. And in this case, it doesn't seem to happen, yet you're looking at, she had plenty of motive.
She was managing Snoop in the very beginning, but Snoop wasn't happy with that.
Nightlife Management, which Sharitha Knight owned, which was Suge Knight's wife. By Suge owning Death Row Records, it would be a conflict of interest of him managing his artists too. So he had that in his wife's name. And not only did she manage every artist that was on Death Row, she also managed Caution. She managed us.
I think that he gave her the nightlife entertainment to give her some experience, get her experience, because she was young.
Anything goes down with Suge, you know who's going to run this company? Reggie. Nope, wrong. That's pressure Reggie can't handle. Let me tell you, if something goes wrong with Suge, who's going to run the company? Common sense, right? Sharitha is on the thing. Sharitha's on the paper. Yeah, Reggie would carry most of the burden. Man, they're tighter than you think. They're tighter than you think.
Even though she was young, you know, she had a baby, and so that kind of gave her the edge over a few people. I knew what he did when we were outside Death Row Records, but as soon as Sharitha found out about it, something that had happened, he sent you home. You were done. He didn't play that one. It was like, I guess it was like, okay, either me or them, and I'm not giving up the child check.
She had a cheating husband. She had financial ties to him. She could definitely gain from him being dead. So in all of those circumstances, there might be good motive.
I mean, murder is pretty simple. The first person you go after is the spouse or the person closest to the victim.
It just changed his ego, his temper. The women started flocking the money, and that was basically the demise of our marriage. Suge got out of control.
She went with the flow. It didn't bother her. A lot of times she got herself into situations too.
Actually, by the time she said that, she was suing Snoop and trying to get money because she said her husband was going to kill him at any moment. She wanted to get her money while Snoop was still alive.
But more than just Suge, we wondered if maybe Tupac was a threat to Sharitha.
When Tupac came in, the picture of Death Row, it all just crumbled.
It would have been easy for her to take over, but I don't think that she had the experience that was necessary to keep a multi-million-dollar record company running like that.
You couldn't reach Sharitha except through intermediaries who were lawyers, but I had documents, and she knew I had those. I basically knew about her relationship with Kevin Gaines, so it was how far in Kevin Gaines was. Was he just involved with you, or was he really was he working for Suge too? And she basically claimed that he did work for Death Row Records, but it was at her behest and through her, and that the only time he was ever around Suge was the time she thought Suge was gonna kill him.
He worked briefly for Suge Knight, just as approximately 100 other officers. Officers were paid $75 an hour to work for Suge Knight. I was asked to work for Suge Knight, which I declined. But a lot of officers did, and they weren't all black officers, and they weren't all from LAPD.
They took a drive, and Gaines and she both got scared.
But according to the stories that roamed the halls of Death Row Records, Kevin Gaines was taken out to the middle of the desert as a warning. He was stripped naked and left to walk back to the city.
Because Suge was being very menacing, and she basically backed him off by saying, this man's a police officer, he's got a gun, you wouldn't dare kill a police officer.
According to FBI documents, Kevin Gaines was in Las Vegas from 2 days prior to the shooting of Shakur until 2 days after the death of Shakur. So we know that Kevin Gaines was already Snoop Dogg's bodyguard and apparently his muscle, and that Kevin Gaines had a relationship with Sharitha Knight. So what exactly was Kevin Gaines doing out on that special assignment in Las Vegas? We came across a letter that was we call it the confession letter, that was given to us by Chris Blatchford at Fox News. And this letter was given to him in 1998. By a gentleman who is now in prison. But at the time, he was a confidential informant for Fox News for Chris Blatchford, and it was reliable. It helped him, actually tipped him off to a couple of really big burglaries that had happened. CHP's offices got burglarized, and he helped Fox catch the people that did it. And this letter was alleged to have been written by Danny and Malcolm Patton. And the Patton brothers were Piru.
Yes.
And
it's a gang in Los Angeles.
Yes, it was a gang in Los Angeles, I should say that. That the Blood Gang. And that they had mapped out this entire, not only confession that they were involved with the shootings, but why the shootings happened, what was all involved with it to begin with. And in that letter, not only were the Pattons the ones who were alleged to have written the letter, but they named a rapper by the name of Little Half Dead. You have to be pretty hardcore, know the Dog Pound, to know who the players are, to know who he is. So his name came up, but it was immediately kind of the scoff because nobody ever heard this before. You don't need to look any further than the album cover that Little Half Dead did. In this album cover, he features a picture of a dead Tupac Shakur slumped over a console at Can-Am Studios, along with a picture of what arguably looks like Yafu Fula, the second victim right after the shooting, as a victim as well, being shot in the head. Little Half Dead himself is dressed up as no one other than the Terminator.
Dog Pound, we was really on our fuck Death Row shit, really. You know what I'm saying? We was already saying fuck Death Row.
And the story goes that they owed Freeway Rick Ross some money. At that time, Fox News was paying a lot of money, and if they thought you could break a story that would get the kind of OJ ratings that you solved Tupac and Biggie, that kind of ratings back in 97, 98, well, maybe it was worth giving this to. We've also heard that it was an insurance policy because people were dropping like flies during those days. Sometimes you can give the press a letter and you say, if anything happens to me, you're free to put this out. There are several different points that the letter brings out, and we narrowed it down to 4 basic benchmarks that we could look at to see if there was any legitimacy. The first one was demo stealing. The letter mentions the fact that there was a problem with demo stealing. At the time, there was a problem with demo stealing. There were a lot of people ripping off albums.
Yeah, I saw that all the time in the studio. I still see it to this day. When people would come to Death Row to play their tracks for us, if it was a good track after they left, we might just make something that sounded like what we just heard. Now there's a song by Tupac called Toss It Up, which is really started out from No Diggity. One day, all of a sudden, Death Row Security comes through the door and they've got the master tape of No Diggity. As it got handed down the line to different producers, more and more stuff got erased of No Diggity, and then it's just kind of hard to hear that that's in there.
The second thing that we looked at in the letter was actually the reference to the fact that there was an altercation between Little Half Dead and Tupac's soldiers.
I think Pac was a great man, but his governor was broke. You know, in the car, when you got your governor where you could only go a certain, Pac had to go all the way, every time, all out or nothing.
It got to the point where I had a bail bondsman on speed dial, and he knew me, and he knew our money was good. So anytime Tupac or any of the guys got in trouble, and usually it was Tupac, and then Man would have to get bailed out also, that I'd call and get them bailed out right away.
This is back in the days where we were using DATs, and I queued up the DAT to the wrong spot, and Pac, he just blasted me in front of the whole crowd. I'm sorry, y'all. That's my stupid brother. That's my stupid brother on the mix. You know, I'm like,
whoa, they better come now. Check this out. They fired me, but did it in a roundabout punk snitch way. So I caught them on the streets and beat they behinds. You know what I'm saying? Okay, like, I was a menace to the youth, brother. And it ain't over. I still got more than
And I'm going like it's a movie. My fist is coming back like this. I got him by the neck, and I'm getting ready to punch him, and just like a movie, I get snatched off him. And then it's the bum rush, and everybody just start rat packing me. And it was like Raging Bull, blood spurting everywhere, and I just felt my body just contort. I'd never been, rat packed before. I was just shocked I didn't feel anything.
The third thing that the confession letter brings up is actually the fact that there was a bounty placed out on Tupac and Suge Knight. That's not news. There were bounties that were put out on allegedly on Death Row Chains.
Right.
There was allegedly bounties put out on that. Crooked Eye talks about the fact that there was actually a bounty that was put out. If you were a Death Row artist, you were marked for death.
Okay.
The fourth thing that we looked at, and this was the real jaw dropper, and that was that they mentioned Reggie Wright Jr. and his involvement in the fact that he was going to provide information as to where they were going to be and to provide barricades so that there was actually no way out.
Tupac thought he was going to a place where he could have protection, but both Tupac and Suge were in over their heads, and they were both targeted for execution that night.
Why don't you have people mad at you or upset that they're holding your freedom in your hand?
Yeah, we love it.
By this time, we know that Death Row Records and Ruthless Records had been funded with drug money, and that Death Row Records was the subject of a money laundering investigation. The operation at Death Row Records was the kind of organization that you'd want to keep things kind of quiet. Suge Knight started showing up on talk shows, he started showing up on magazine covers, and he started bringing a lot of attention to people who just did not want that kind of attention.
In 1996, Death Row Records is worth $500 million. There are a lot of people that are really upset with Suge Knight at the time. So if you're Reggie Wright Jr., it only makes sense that if something is worth $500 million and you're tired of being harassed by the guy who runs it, why not just kill him and take it from him? Guns, drugs, jealousy, money. This is a really bad formula here.
And keep Daz back. Keep Daz back. I'm like, fuck that shit. I could have jumped out on his ass in Vegas, but it was killing me. But Snoop was like, hold on. Don't fuck this up. Don't fuck this up. Don't fuck this up. Don't fuck this up. Don't fuck this up.
On September the 7th, Reggie Wright asked me to ride with him to the meeting that we were having. It was about 12 noon, and we were going to George Calisa's office in Las Vegas. When we arrived there, there was 23 other security personnel for Right Way Security at this meeting, along with the attorney and Reggie Wright.
Which is another thing that's unusual.
And one of the main issues and the main points were we were not to carry our weapons. So that right away brought up the issue of why not.
I've been to Club 662 on many of occasions, and never have they told me to leave my weapons.
So myself, Michael Moore, and Al Giddens was excluded from that because we were going to be the main security at the Club 662 that evening.
Why would I leave my weapons in a vehicle or in the hotel room, and I'm personally guarding Pac in one of the most hottest places to be?
We were told to leave our weapons originally into our hotel room. Okay, then we said, well, why would we leave them in a hotel room?
There was going to be a lot of commotion, there was going to be a lot of people, and what that's going to make it is a bodyguarding incident.
So at this point in time, all of the weapons were going to be at Club 662 left in our vehicles. Therefore, if there was going to be a problem, we would be able to retrieve our weapons from our vehicles.
I got into a little argument with Reggie Wright at lunch over it. He said, Mike, I'm putting Frank back on him, and I'm taking you back off. And I said, Reggie, that part doesn't make sense. Why not leave me and Frank on Tupac?
I was Los Angeles County jail booking in a burglary suspect. I went to work that day.
At 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the afternoon in Las Vegas, at the Luxor, security was all brought together by Reggie Wright on the day that Pac was shot, and we were told not to carry weapons because we were all armed.
We were told specifically, do not carry your weapon.
And did you find that kind of strange? Everybody after the fight at the casino, and everybody thought it was strange. That why were guys told not to carry weapons? Even the cops that were there told not to carry weapons. Everybody was told not to carry weapons.
That's what we were told. Now, I, at the meeting, was asked one of the few questions. Why would you tell us not to carry our weapons?
This is their #1 artist. I mean, he's as high profile as they get.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and you're paying for all the security.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you got all these guys at the club.
Right.
Something's wrong. The pieces, this whole situation, it just doesn't fit.
I think the reason they removed me from Tupac is because I was one of the few people that wouldn't buy into not carrying your weapon. And during no part of that day did I take my weapon off. And Mr. Wright knew that. So they removed me off Tupac so there wouldn't be a weapon there.
I rode with Reggie, and as we were riding, driving, going over to the meeting, he began to tell me about how he was upset at Kevin Hackey because Kevin Hackey didn't come out to Las Vegas, and that Kevin Hackey had my Nextel two-way cell phone radio that should have been given to me when I arrived in Vegas.
Normally, Frank and I would both have radios, and Frank could just say, hey, Mike, we're over here. There was no radio again. That day, Frank doesn't have a radio, I don't have a radio, which I normally have, and we have confusion. So for most of the day, all this went on, and Tupac did not have a clue that's what we were doing.
Death Row was worth $500 million at that time, and Tupac Shakur most of that revenue. If your go-to excuse as the director of security for Death Row Records is that you can't afford an extra radio and that's why you don't have enough radios to go around, you should be ashamed of yourself.
When Reggie did that and I questioned it, Reggie did something that he's never done. He's never stayed at 662. That day, he stayed at the club. Then why would he need me there? And why would I be taken off of Tupac?
I didn't just meet Suge when I started working at Death Row. I used to work at Solar Records. He was running around gophering and going buying lunch and picking lunch up and all of that stuff. but they groomed him into Suge Knight. The ladies would see from Suge is this nice side. And the nice side is making sure you didn't want for nothing.
You know, Suge, for a while, would send her roses all the time. Too many. Every time when she was here, you opened the door and there was some more flowers, you know, for every occasion and sometimes every week. Initially, he would send her flowers. And when we were still in California, they initially kept the bills paid. See, we thought that was Pac's house. We did not know that was Death Row's house. That was not his house. It was not in his name. From the moment we got there, we thought that was Pac's house he was buying.
So he bought everybody a car for Christmas. But the catch on that, on the control side, on the flip side, he never put the car in your name. So if he got mad at you, he took your car back.
He died in September, October. We had an estate storage company come and take all of the stuff out of that house.
He has a side of him that is the sweetest pie, and then he has a side of him that he literally turns into the devil. Because he's so nice with it, he catches you off guard when he does something.
Suge had them to pack everything in Wilshire House and send it down here. She didn't even know it was coming. It looked and it was there. She didn't want it in particularly, but you know, she took it because it was here because she said it wasn't his.
We were getting very close to wrapping on Gridlock. We probably had maybe a week or two left on it. And myself and Kevin Hackey, we were both on duty that day on the set. And it was in the evening time because it was already night. And I got this phone call from Yasmin Fula. And she said, "Hey, Frank, I'm coming down to Gridlock. Don't you and Kevin leave because I need to talk to the two of you." So, you know, probably 30 minutes later, she shows up. And she goes, "Hey," she goes, "there's some things going on over at the Death Row office. Pac has called an audit on the Death Row office." You have to keep in mind, it was a conflict of interest for Tupac to have the same attorney that Death Row had, being David Kenner. You know, I mean, that speaks for itself right there. He wasn't feeling comfortable with what he was receiving, I guess, as far as his royalties or whatever.
So that's the completion of that obligation as I know it. And I tell you, he had movie scripts and he was truly interested in that. People were talking to him about it.
Yeah, he's done. He was done. He was done. He was done. There were meetings with attorneys, Yaz and I. Yeah, he was done. He was done. He had fulfilled his obligation with Death Row and no intentions of renewing any sort of paper agreement.
You know, David Kenner, or Suge Knight, or anyone like that was upset with Tupac, what do they would have done? Institutionalized Tupac. Had it appealed bond revoked for some reason. They would have no reason to kill him or anything like that. They would just have him go back to jail and humble him again.
According to Reggie Wright, if Tupac got out of line, we'll just throw him back in jail and humiliate him, humble him a little. Isn't that what they did to Kevin Gaines? Isn't that what they did to Snoop Dogg?
And Sullivan is down on his stomach. And that's it. It's over in the first round.
Tyson was Pac's homeboy, and to see Tyson in the ring doing his thing, whooping up on Bruce Seldon. Pac was excited, he was jumping up and he was, saying what he was saying, everybody, getting excited about a fight. And that continued from the seats into the back of the area where the boxers come back in at. after the fight is over. And he, got back there and he's just going off, man, 50 blows, 50, man, he knocked them out, 50 blows, blah, blah, blah. That was it. That was it. That was the excitement of that fight. That was Pac's excitement behind it. Mike Tyson never came in the back, so we never met up with Mike. We ended up leaving. As we left out of the fight arena area, as we got out into the casino area again, the rest of our entourage was out there waiting on us. As we walked up to greet them, which would have been, all of Death Row entourage, along with Tupac's entourage, one of Suge's guys, his name is Trevon, came over and whispered in Tupac's right ear, because I was standing on Tupac's left. Tupac took off and ran.
His governor was broke.
I took off behind him.
Your kid was about to get overturned.
And the rest of the entourage is behind me.
Not want to go back to prison.
I'd never been Rat Pack before.
Tupac comes to, at this time I didn't know who it was, now being Orlando Anderson, standing by this planter, just like waiting.
Why don't you just have people mad at you on that? That's the holding your freedom in your hand.
It was a setup.
Tupac had a 4-year jail the other day. Holding your freedom, holding your freedom, holding your freedom.
Pac just ran up on him and then Orlando Anderson swung back. At this time, Pac's medallion broke. When he reached down and grabbed the medallion, I grabbed him and got him out of the fight. By the time the entourage who was behind me had gotten there, the footage that is from the MGM everyone sees, Orlando Anderson's on the ground and everybody's kicking at him, beating him down or whatever. Because I knew the way through the MGM, because I was in the MGM walking around earlier looking for everyone, I knew how to walk us out of the MGM to the entrance. And I walked us out of the entrance. As the tape shows, I'm in front, Pac and Suge, and everybody is following me now.
After the beating, there seems to be a divergence of stories. On one hand, some people say that Orlando Anderson left the MGM to go on and do other things. But witness Corey Edwards actually said that Orlando Anderson stayed at the bar. Corey Edwards was there with friends, as was Orlando Anderson. And if Orlando Anderson was in fact at that bar, according to Corey Edwards, you don't think the Las Vegas Police Department would have checked the closed circuit cameras at the MGM to find out whether that was true? Well, Russell Poole said they did, and Russell Poole said that that was true.
After the fight that occurred at the MGM, when we got to the Lexor, the crowd was all outside, all of the groupies and everything. As I walked to the car with them, the first thought in my mind was, my weapon is in my car. My car is on the other side of the Lexor Hotel. I wasn't gonna tell Tupac and tell Suge, wait 1 minute, I have to run over to my car and get my gun. Well, how come you don't have your gun on you? Well, Reggie told us not to.
You took a fall because you didn't have your gun, you should have had your gun. Well, you know what, man? See, now we got conflicting stories now, because we were told you not, he didn't tell you when I told y'all, listen in the car, you carry your gun with you. Exactly. There you go. You said leave them in the car.
And it ponders through me all the time. What if I could have done something? Then I would have really been the hero that Suge Knight once thought I was when Snoop's trailer got shot up. I have put myself in this position in my mind many times. To say, what if I would have had my gun?
While I was working at 662, I heard something over the Nextels that we all carried for security. And what I heard was, got him, got him, got him.
Michael talks about hearing something over the radio. Well, he would have heard it over Reggie's radio because he wouldn't have had a radio that night.
Then someone else came on the radio and said, hey, don't say nothing over the radio, which was the Nextels we were using radio to radio. And I just clearly heard somebody say, don't say that over the radio. But the person who said it was not Homeboy Security, nor was it one of our security guards. It was, to me, it would be like a stranger. Someone, and the person that said that was Caucasian, definitely not African American.
Oh no, even getting that, we were in the cab and we heard, something happened Tupac, something. It was like, you know, over the radio, oh, those rappers, Tupac, something, you know, people have been shot. I was like, oh no, I'm like, pull over, you know, I'm like calling Yaz. I'm like, is everything okay? And she called, she says, no, go to the hospital. She told me where the hospital was. We went to the hospital. And I also remember seeing, you know, Suge roll by in the gurney with a little Band-Aid on his head. And I was like, what happened?
They missed. They missed. All of the planning that they'd put into the operation, they shot tons of rounds into that car to the point where everybody thought that they were dead. But at the end of the day, they missed.
After the shooting occurred on September 7th that evening, I don't understand something that occurred. Trayvon, after we were questioned by the homicide detectives, went back over to Club 662. If he cared so much about Pac, why didn't he go to the hospital?
It didn't really seem to register on anybody's radar that it might have been an attempted assassination on Suge Knight.
Suge was at the hospital, Pac was at the hospital. How come everyone that supposedly have loved Pac, other than his family, the Outlaws?
This is about selling a narrative. They tried to sell a narrative to the Las Vegas police and it didn't work. They tried to sell the same narrative through Chuck Phillips at the Los Angeles Times, and that didn't work. They tried to sell the narrative through the Wallace investigation and the Wallace civil suit through Wayman Anderson. And then they tried the last round to sell it through an ex-LAPD cop and a book called Murder Rap.
How come everybody didn't go to the hospital? What happened? I don't understand that.
So now we're in damage control mode. Suge Knight got shot at and he lived. Now what the hell are we gonna do? Because you've got somebody asking questions and we don't have an answer.
I had Newsweek and Time. I had all of the major magazines and newspapers coming to Club 662.
They gotta make up a story. They gotta come up with something.
Because after the fight, Tupac was going to entertain.
You have the attempted assassination of the head of arguably the largest record label at that time. Now, if this were David Geffen or any other big record label executives, there'd be cops falling all over themselves to try to investigate this. But it didn't seem to work that way.
So then I went and to see Tupac. They wouldn't let me close to Tupac, but they did let me see in there. So that's when Kenner came to me and said, do you have keys to Death Row, to the offices? He said, well, then you get on the next thing smoking. You know, hey, you need some money? I said, no, I got money. And go back to LA.
So Suge Knight goes back to Los Angeles and has a meeting at Death Row Records.
Suge called the meeting, and all the artists were instructed to come to this meeting, and certain security was invited, and I happened to be one of them. But prior to going into the meeting with Suge and all the artists from Death Row, Reggie met with us out front in his own meeting. But I'm gonna add something to that. We were also instructed to lie by Reggie Wright to Suge.
But if I'm Suge Knight and somebody takes a shot at me, regardless of who else is in the car, they're shooting at me. I want to know who shot at me and why.
And the reason we were instructed to lie was because Reggie Wright told us not to carry any weapons.
What do? They lie.
So I have, by me just looking at what Reggie told me, I'm thinking that Mr. Knight was unaware.
More importantly, I want to know how far down this rabbit hole goes.
The meeting was basically about what happened, and the artists were drilling security about what methods we had used and what was some of our tactics.
And we know from looking at the statement that Suge Knight gave to the Las Vegas Police Department that he fully expected that Frank Alexander and every other bodyguard there was to carry their weapons. So whatever the case might have been, Suge Knight didn't get the message.
I looked around and no one said it. No one was speaking up for security.
So I'm Suge Knight and I'm asking myself, who the hell is shooting at me and why? And who's the first person I'm gonna ask? My head of security, Reggie Wright Jr.
And it looked like Reggie wasn't gonna say that information to them.
The driver appeared to be hit with fragments in the head area.
At this time, the wounds are life-threatening, but serious, not in critical condition at this time. Homicide detectives are very busy right now.
Well, he has numerous injuries. He has multiple gunshot wounds to the chest, and so yes, that's always a possibility that a lung could be hit, a lung could collapse, or there could be other internal injuries that might need additional attention in the OR.
Kevin Hackey shows up in Las Vegas, and he's got a lot of questions as to what's happening.
I was in the hospital. His eyes, you could tell he was sedated. So, I mean, obviously his pupils were open, but there was no movement there. I actually started crying. I mean, I always call him, I like the kid.
But Kevin Hackey gets into a scrape with Las Vegas Metropolitan Police when he reveals to them that he may be involved with a federal law enforcement agency.
I did work undercover for the FBI and ATF during my tenure with Death Row Records and Right Way Protective Services.
There was a report that was written by the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department about the altercation with Kevin Hackey. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department wasn't concerned about anybody's safety, but they were more concerned about the public relations of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, and strangely, the public relations of the Compton Police Department. Now, since Compton wasn't going to be involved in the case for several days later, why would the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department be so concerned about the public relations of the Compton Police Department if they weren't there yet?
A CEO of a company or the wife of somebody being murdered is one kind of investigation, but now you're talking about something where there was all kinds of alleged baggage involved.
This is where you begin to see Compton Police Department inject themselves into the middle of the Las Vegas investigation under the false pretense that it's a gang activity.
And again, that first night, I don't think he was totally forthcoming on everything he knew.
So they approached Frank Alexander to basically lie to the Vegas Police Department and tell them that a chain was actually snatched the day of the shooting, September 6th, earlier that morning. And that was the story that was concocted then. It happened that day. Nothing about the Lakewood Mall and nothing about anything happening months earlier. It was all happening that day. And that's what they told Frank Alexander to tell the cops, and that's what Frank Alexander told the cops.
Every time I think it's over, they drag me right back in again.
And later on, when Frank Alexander is asked to repeat that story again, he refuses.
We were supposed to went down to Vegas, me, you, and Malcolm, because Malcolm can ID the person. We were supposed to send you and him down to ID, to see if you look at the pictures, because they had a suspect, and that's when they had Orlando as a suspect, and then they were going to just have y'all look at the pictures before then just to see if maybe that, made your memory get better or whatever. So you can describe somebody, but once you see a picture, oh yeah, that's him. And so that's what they were going to have you to do. And that's what David told them, that we got two witnesses that's, maybe can help you out and put some things in the light. And plus the statement that you gave about the chain and all of that, with the additional information.
And when he refuses, the story begins to evolve a little bit. It doesn't become that the chain was snatched that day. It becomes that the chain was snatched several months earlier.
His head of security is a ex-Compton police officer. It's suspected that you have Compton gang members who came up there to do a shooting, gangland-style shooting, and yet and still, who's heading up the investigation? You have a lieutenant from Compton Police. This whole thing, it smells from high hell.
Hundreds of hours of investigation was spent on the narrative that said that this guy murdered this other person. That narrative came from the powers to be.
There's a Compton police officer by the name of Tim Brennan who is a protege of Reggie Wright Sr. Well, Tim Brennan is the first one that comes up in this investigation with the entire concept that a gang was involved and that Orlando Anderson was actually the shooter. Tim Brennan and Bobby Ladd run around talking about what great guys Reggie Wright Sr. and Horry Taylor were. And of course, this is the same Reggie Wright Sr. that the Compton Police Department says is in charge of both the gangs and the drugs, and drugs are disappearing from the evidence locker. And the same Horry Taylor, that's the one that has 2 keys of cocaine fall out of his locker when they investigate him after being suspended.
So obviously from a law enforcement agency looking into this, all of a sudden there's war in Compton. Basic calls are made, so quote unquote, alleged Crip members, whatever, were killed left and right. But from Las Vegas standpoint, I mean, the whole thing smells.
Tim Brennan lays the entire Orlando Anderson theory smack down in the middle of the investigation and uses a couple of confidential informants, and we have no idea of their reliability.
Oh yeah, people, embellish in search warrants to get it, so they can get it. It's not, in my experience, it wasn't something that was widely done, but there were times that you'd hear about it was done.
But seriously, what are they going to do? They're going to try to blame somebody else. And who are they going to blame in a hurry? They're going to blame somebody that they can't point the finger on, somebody that can't be named individually. They're going to name some entity. They're going to name some group, some people, some gang. But at the end of the day, they're going to lie.
And they had to get a search warrant, and they couldn't come up with, the probable cause for it, so sometimes it was embellished or, made up.
That's what Tim Brennan told me personally. He said whenever they're ready, tell them that when they're ready to know who did it, who was in the car and all that stuff, tell them we have the evidence, we know who did it, we know exactly who was in that car that night. And he's basically saying, and I don't want to start dissension between two different departments, but he said
it's funny because everything we had came from Tim Brennan.
You can't always take what they say 100% true, because you always have to look at a motive for somebody of why are they saying why are they telling me what they're telling me? Do they have a motive?
You have to understand the absurdity of this. The entire narrative being manufactured is for a reason. You have to solicit a response from the judge. You have to get the judge to believe the story.
Is there some reason why they're doing this? Because, it may be something other than the truth.
If they had told the judge, hey, there's just some random arm that came out of a car, and we really don't know who it is, and we really don't know who was responsible for it, and it may or may not have been related to a chain snatch earlier that day or 2 months earlier, and we're really not sure of that, there's not a very good likelihood that that judge is going to sign that search warrant.
They don't like him, or they don't like the individual, or they got something against the individual, or somebody told them, I need you to pin this guy.
And no witness to the Tupac Shakur fight at the MGM said anything about Tupac saying anything, especially the line, "Are you from the South?"
Cops do it all the time.
That was intentionally added to the search warrant to give it a flavor of contradiction and to identify the South with the Southside Crips. And this was to make it appear gang motivated.
When a judge signs a search warrant, that judge is absolutely relying upon the representations made in the affidavit, and the affidavit has to be under oath.
It's important to understand that this kind of a false narrative emphasizes the fact that there was a fight and it made it Tupac versus the Southside Crips. So it set up the big fight.
The judge is relying upon the veracity and truthfulness of that police officer.
The statements made by Tim Brennan were not simply academic. They were actually made for an intended purpose and for a reason that that judge would have to buy later.
And there are times, and I was a judge myself, where you get the call at 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning from the drug enforcement officers that they want to come to your house and have you sign a search warrant.
It's like when we served the search warrant on my undercover operation, the affidavit was this thick.
The affidavit says that somebody got out of the car and started talking shit. Well, that didn't happen. No witness ever said that that happened. And if you really go back to think about the amount of work that would have involved, it asks a whole lot more questions.
And you got to make darn sure as a judge that you're attentive, you're attuned to what they're doing, and you have some clarity.
Well, if all your facts are based upon the opinion or assumptions of other individuals and you have no confirmation of that by other witnesses, then you're going to go back and you're going to put your affidavit together and you say, I am swearing to these truths that were given to me. And these truths may not be truths. They're only opinions and assumptions.
For example, if someone got out of the passenger side of a stopped car and walked all the way around the front of that car or around the back of that car, talking shit and holding a gun, that the bodyguards would have reacted to that. But it didn't happen.
So the detective that is getting the information must be able to confirm or to have other evidentiary value to verify them as truths.
In my era, If I was caught in lying, it would have been the end of my career. I would have been fired. They wouldn't have whitewashed, they would have fired me.
Each one of the statements made in Tim Brennan's affidavit that were incorrect were not made accidentally. They were made intentionally. And the reason that they were made intentionally was to alter the meaning of the search warrant. They altered the statement. It wasn't, "Are you from the South?" Tupac said nothing like that. But if you alter it and you say, "Are you from the South?" that's not just a simple mistake. That makes it personal, it makes it argumentative, and it makes it actionable.
They can't use you anymore because you've already lied on the record, and therefore you have no credibility anymore, so therefore they can't use you.
And it got to the point where Compton had to do something.
It began before dawn. The crime sweep involved 300 officers, 10 agencies, including the FBI, at more than 37 locations in the Compton, Linwood, and Long Beach areas.
Based on the affidavit and the search warrant of Tim Brennan, they go ahead and they do this big gang sweep.
Of course, during the affidavit, I chased him into a house and we recovered some guns out of that house.
Looking all over Compton for Orlando Anderson. But who finds him? Tim Brennan. So they haul Orlando Anderson in. Vegas police ask him a bunch of questions. And what do the Vegas police do? They walk away.
I just don't see the interest.
And Tim Brennan and the Compton PD can't figure out what the heck's going on. We're giving it to you on a silver platter, and you're just not buying.
I've heard Manning before say that, well, we treat it like every other case, and he doesn't get any special treatment because he is a celebrity, but, you know, I don't know if I buy all that.
There was an arrest made for the murder of Tupac Shakur. It was done by Tim Brennan to Orlando Anderson.
You know, I know the people they need to talk to solve it.
So suddenly the rhetoric starts. Now Las Vegas is incompetent, Brent Becker's incompetent, Kevin Manning's incompetent, everybody's incompetent.
The bullshit that everybody said that we didn't do anything, that's so out in left field, they're ridiculous.
You know, and that's that. I had some problems between Las Vegas and me because they don't, you know, like what I've said. Right. But, you know, I speak the truth.
In the Tim Brennan search warrant, there's mention of several gang members involved, and one of those gang members involved is a gang member by the name of Danny Patton, who also goes by the nickname of White Boy. During the service and the execution of this search warrant, many houses and residences that were involved with these gang members were searched, with the notable exception of one, and that was Danny Patton, aka White Boy. It reminds me of the old statement, don't ask a question you don't already know the answer to.
There are a lot of things that no one else knows about.
The Vegas Police Department knew exactly what was going on. It stunk to high heaven and they didn't want any part of it. On the way out, Orlando Anderson says to Brent Becker, "Are you going to arrest me?" Brent Becker says, "Arrest you for what?"
Do I think we know who did it? Yeah.
And the further and harder that Compton pushed the matter, the further the Vegas police backed away and the further that they didn't want anything to do with it.
Right off the bat, we're wanting to talk to the guy that's in the car with Tupac Shakur, Suge Knight. And we're working right away with that. And in fact, the night of the shooting, we tried to talk to him, but were refused access to him by members of death row, attorneys. And in fact, it took 3 days to get to talk to Suge Knight.
And here's where David Kenner comes into play. David Kenner was a former prosecutor that suddenly, for whatever reason, decided he wanted to start defending criminals, and he became a defense attorney. He was a very good defense attorney.
And we kept getting the runaround, yeah, we'll get you in touch with him. Yes, we'll do this, yes, we'll do that.
Who was giving you the runaround?
David Kenner's office.
It was actually an umbrella that covered a lot of the legal shenanigans that were going on at Death Row Records.
But understand that any shit can change tomorrow.
Compton PD had one more shot at trying to ruin Suge Knight, and that happened in the courtroom.
They was able to pull they scheme and their ideas off by me being in prison.
He had so many people shook on these streets that, yo, motherfuckers can't wait till he's just gone for good, so they could fully breathe a sigh of relief.
Because there's two things that I always say, being from the ghetto, either they're gonna take the money from you, which you'll be OJ, and if they can't take the money from you, they take you for the money.
It's y'all motherfuckers that's scared of him.
The only way they take you from the money is why you die, deaf, or in prison.
Yo, motherfuckers can't wait till he's just gone for good, so they can fully breathe a sigh of relief. I mean, I feel like they're not gonna rest until Suge Knight is dead or in jail.
Tupac Shakur and Suge Knight were kicking Orlando.
I seen him standing right there helping. He was about the only one.
He made the comment that Tupac and Knight beat him up pretty good.
And with that, Suge Knight is sentenced to 9 years in prison. So if the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department weren't interested in Orlando Anderson as a suspect, who were they interested in? I think the answer to that question comes in the form of logs and notes that were made by a police officer on the Los Angeles Police Department involving certain incidents that happened at Death Row's Can-Am Studios. That officer's name was Knox.
You're right that Knox is probably the most underrepresented character in this story because he was the very first guy to get on the fact that there were all these cops working for Death Row Records. I can remember when talking to Sergio Robledo when they were trying to get, subpoena Knox to, and he said, he's disappeared. I mean, the cops have given him a leave of absence. He's left the country. We've staked out his house. He's never home. He hasn't been home in we don't know how long. I mean, we cannot get him the guy we most want, and we cannot locate him. He sort of stumbled into it. He was the senior lead officer, which is, it's an elite position, and there's just one at every LAPD station. He was responding to citizen complaints about activity at Death Row's studios. People were upset that these gangbangers were parking in their driveways, and if they questioned them, then they were being threatened with guns and that kind of thing. So he decided he should visit the studio, and the first day he arrives, he's back and forth with this guy who turns out to be Ramsey Lewis's son and turns into one of the best informants about what was going on at Death Row Records.
What Kendrick Knox observed may have actually driven Las Vegas in the direction of their investigation.
And the guy says, well, one of the people who sits here is one of your own guys. What? And so he follows that up. That's Macaulay. But he's finding out that there are a number of other LAPD officers working for Death Row Records, and that there are higher-ups that already know it. It's already been, he goes to his superior who says, yeah, we know that, but that's not going to be in any reports, and you're not going to make anything public about that. So Knox has pushed back a step, but he still is continuing with his investigation because he's got all these leads that are, he's getting into the Tupac case, he's getting into the Biggie case, he's getting evidence that there are cops, there were lots of cops, including LAPD, present in Las Vegas and even on the scene when Tupac was killed. Implication that they were, helping set it up.
The reason that you've never heard of Ken Knox were because the minute that Ken Knox turned in his reports, the LAPD understood the value of those reports and how damaging they might be. And those reports just disappeared.
Well, that was when he really knew this is serious. He took a vacation, I think it was. And when he came back, he found that his computer had been completely erased. I mean, everything. It was blank. They shut him down, basically. They got him alone in a room and threatened him and told him his career was over. The one thing he did do was pass it on to Russ Poole. When I talked to him, it was clear, he'd made basically I'd made my decision. I decided to save myself. It's not worth, throwing my own life away and, my family, hurting my family for what? To make cases against these gangbangers?
One other reason that the Tim Brennan affidavit tended to gain traction was because Tim Brennan falsely characterized a series of gang shootings that happened as a war that was in retaliation for the shooting of Tupac Shakur.
Our investigation revealed that some of the motivation for the shootings that occurred in Compton may be in retaliation for the events that transpired in Las Vegas.
And in fact, it was stated later that the shootings had nothing to do with the gang war. It's no secret that the Crips and the Bloods were hanging out together and were recording at Death Row Records. But what made it interesting was on the eve of Tim Brennan telling everybody that there was a gang war, 10 Los Angeles police officers showed up at Can-Am Studios to basically hoist a bunch of gang guys out of the studio. What they found was that Bloods were working with Crips at the studio, which was no secret, but that the Crips were East Coast Crips that came from New Jersey. West Coast Bloods working with East Coast Crips. Not much of a gang war there. But even more importantly, if the term East Coast Crips and Crips coming from New Jersey sound familiar, it may be because of something that happened just shortly after that.
It was a criminal organization, be like officers working for the Gambino family.
Yafufula was a name that a lot of people have thrown back in our faces that we were derelict in doing things. Yafufula was interviewed the night of the shooting. Yafufula gave a statement. People say we never interviewed him. He was interviewed. And the big thing is everybody says that he said he could identify the shooter. No, he did not. He never said that to us. He said he might be able to identify the driver. That is what he said. And we tried to reach out to re-interview Yafufula. Well, next thing you know, we're getting notification from, I think it's in Orange, New Jersey, if I remember right, that he's been murdered in a housing project or something like that over some drugs. The problem was, this is a big country. People go wherever, you know, we don't have tracking devices on them. So we have to depend on people that we know we can get in touch with to try and reach out to them.
Immediately after the Yafufula shooting takes place, Compton police and Las Vegas police make it known publicly that the shooting has absolutely nothing to do with the death of Tupac Shakur. Well, that's not exactly true, because the FBI went back several years later and interviewed the New Jersey detectives that worked the Yafufula shooting, and they said that the Yafufula shooting was done execution style, in the style of the mob. The Compton police and Death Row Records had two big problems. Number one, they still weren't able to convince the Vegas police that Orlando Anderson had anything to do with the murder. And Reggie Wright was having trouble trying to convince Frank Alexander to go back and repeat the same lie that he had told Vegas police earlier in the investigation about the chain snatch that occurred that day.
You were supposed to went down to Vegas, me, you, and Malcolm, and plus the statement that you gave about the chain and all of that. You know, with the additional information.
The LAPD had just come out of the Christopher Commission, which was started by the Rodney King beatings, and it had everything to do with police misconduct. So police misconduct was nothing new to the Los Angeles Police Department, but to also have it involving gangs and having it involve an agency that's dealing in drugs like death row would have made a serious black eye for the LAPD.
The LAPD was basically in cover-up mode, you know, self-protection.
Kevin Gaines was in Las Vegas from 2 days prior to the shooting of Shakur until 2 days after the death of Shakur. So what are we gonna do? We're gonna galvanize this into the public mindset. We're gonna make sure they don't forget the Southside Crips. We're gonna make sure they don't forget Orlando Anderson. We're gonna make sure they don't forget this is an East Coast, West Coast problem. And we're gonna do it in such a way that it's big and outrageous and you will never forget it.
Fire department, go ahead. We on Fairfax and Wilshire. What's wrong? We're man shot in our car right now. Okay, they drove up next to us and just shot us the car on the passenger side. Okay, somebody's already on the way. Big, you hear me, baby?
I'm standing outside of the Peterson Auto Museum, the site of the Wallace killings. And you know, they did it. Christopher Wallace murder and the corresponding blame placed on Suge Knight as retaliation for the Orlando Anderson shooting moved light years towards legitimizing the cover story cooked up in September of '96. But in a missed move, the Los Angeles Police Department allowed a rogue felon ex-cop to tell a cellmate the details of how the Wallace killing actually went down. The LAPD tried to hide this inmate's testimony because they had used the same informant's alleged credibility to exonerate at least 5 LAPD officers, and they knew he was not just another jailhouse informant. What you're about to hear was worth $1.1 million to the LAPD to hide from the Wallace family. That's what the judge fined the city for not letting this go out to the public. This is what they did not want you to hear, served up by the very witness whose testimony cleared 5 cops.
My name is Kenneth Boatney, and I was in Linwood County Regional Facility from November 1999 to July 2000. There I befriended Rafael Perez, the LAPD officer who was in the center of the Rampart scandal.
And then I could see the motive was patently obvious. He'd done things that were hanging over him. He could have gone to prison for the rest of his life. He could make a deal to get out from under that. But then he could also get revenge on anybody who had ever offended him in any way.
Rafael Perez never mentioned Suge Knight in name. He just said Dave Kenner and Reggie Wright told him and Mac they would find a guy to get the hit done. So it was the $1 million for Puffy and Notorious B.I.G.
I cheated on my employer, and I cheated on all of you, the people of Los Angeles.
From what I was told, it was he gave almost $250 grand, up front, and they owed him $750 grand on the back end.
They'd completely hidden Boagny from, so clearly the LAPD took it at least that seriously, that they would hide all mention of Boagny.
The real break in the case was the arrest of David Mack for a bank robbery out in Los Angeles.
David Mack was an LAPD officer. He was arrested for one of the biggest bank robberies in LA history, which he was caught on film committing.
It's been said publicly that David Mack was actually the introduction of the concept that LAPD cops were working for Death Row Records and were working for Suge Knight. And that's not true, because long before David Mack ever robbed that bank, Ken Knox had logs that clearly spelled out who was working for Death Row Records, and those logs were published to Los Angeles Police Department's Internal Affairs in June of 1996, even before the Shakur shooting took place.
They did a search warrant on his house for the bank robbery. He owned a black SS Impala, and that's the same vehicle that was used in the killing of Biggie Smalls. There's a number of clues that connect David Mack possibly to the killing.
Perez was just along for the ride at the time, going to Death Row meetings when Reggie White, he was pretty much Mack's sidekick at this time. They went and got Amir to get the job done. And Mack had already knew Amir from being from the Nation of Islam, and they went to school together. He was already an assassin for the Nation of Islam.
So Amir Muhammad comes into the story. Russ Poor sees that he's had one visitor. He identifies who this person is, but he basically was trying to cover up who he was. Well, that's suspicious, obviously. And then he looks at the driver's license and sees that the picture looks a lot like the composite drawing that was made of Biggie's shooter.
LA Police Detective Greg Kading came out and said that the reason that Amir Muhammad put a fake Social Security number on the inmate visitor application when he went to visit David Mack was because he did not want his identity stolen.
His explanation was that he was aware that inmates and other people would be able to view or access that log, and he didn't want his identity stolen. This hardly sounds like a professional killer.
And he bought that as a culpable explanation. Well, the fact of the matter is, if you're putting your true date of birth and your true address and your true name on the application, you have more chances of identity theft than just a Social Security number. If you're really that concerned about your identity being stolen, you should use a fake date of birth. You should use a fake address. But he didn't. He used true information, and the only thing that he embellished was his Social Security number, and you'd ask your question, why? Well, it's really simple. The Social Security number is the only thing that's not with you when you get your ID checked.
Amir Muhammad in Orange County, under yet another one of his assumed identities. This time he changed himself physically. He had a shaved head now. Didn't look like the Muslim with the fade haircut anymore. He had a shaved head and a beard. But anyway, he had been arrested for menacing a couple. He was in an SUV, menacing a couple in an SUV with a gun. He pulled out a gun. They pulled up alongside, pointed the gun at him, threatened them. The woman was somebody he'd been involved with, so it wasn't like this wasn't a hit per se. But they called the cops. They pulled him over. He had fake driver's license. He had many aliases. His real name was Harry Billups. He never really, I don't think, legally changed it. I think he still is legally Harry Billups, but he called himself Harry Muhammad, Amir Muhammad. He was convicted in that case, but he was convicted on, I think that was a misdemeanor. Initially it was a felony. They pleaded it down, but a lot of the reason that he got off was that the couple, who were the only witnesses, a week later, were found shot to death. It was ruled by the coroner a murder-suicide. The whole thing seemed dubious to me. You know, this happened well after I wrote Labyrinth that I found out about this, so I didn't follow it all the way. Somebody should.
I told you that this cat was coming to kill us or try to get at us that night. I told you I had intel.
The night that Notorious B.I.G. was killed, LAPD officer James supposed to cut off both cars, where Biggie was in the car and Sean P. Diddy was in the car. James was supposed to cut both of them guys off.
I told our driver, Kenny, run this next 3 lights. Run the light, Kenny. Kenny ran the light, Big stopped at the light. Big get killed. Wasn't meant for him, bruh.
The whole job didn't get done. One of the guys got away, of course, Sean Combs got away. He also told me later on that he found out that James was working with Internal Affairs. He couldn't tell Internal Affairs about that, but he was informing them on a lot of other stuff.
So what exactly was Kevin Gaines doing out on that special assignment in Las Vegas?
Perez said that was the reason he was killed.
No, it wasn't an accident. He goes, do you have any regrets? I says, yeah. And he leans forward again. He goes, you regret shooting him? I says, no, I regret that he's alone in the truck at the time. Figure that one out. You didn't hear that? Alone in the truck at the time. I could have killed a whole truckload of them. And would have been happily doing so. Derwin and his buddy Kevin Gaines were best friends and running partners. That's how Gaines knew who I was, basically. Henderson was a probationer of mine. And I'd seen them one night in Hollywood. And remember, I had long hair driving a fucking Buick Regal. And I'd seen Henderson in traffic, and we stopped nose-faced. I was going south, he was going north. He had another male black in the car with him, but I didn't pay attention to that guy. I was talking to Derwin. We were partners, and we were saying hi to him and talking to him. Turns out Gaines was with him. They were running partners. That's how Gaines knew me.
Reggie Wright and Dave Kenner informed Mac and Perez that they weren't going to pay for the whole contract, and therefore they had to do the bank robbery to get the money to pay Amir, because Amir was real upset about it. He wasn't taking no for an answer. He wanted his money, and the only recourse was for Dave Mack and Rafael Perez, along with Sammy Martin, to do this bank robbery and get the money to pay Amir, which is the reason why the money wasn't recovered.
Have you had any conversations with Perez at all, either over the phone or in person?
No.
No conversations about what's going on?
No.
How about with Sammy Martin? Have you had discussions with Sam Martin over the phone or?
No. If the guy has all these girlfriends or whatever, I mean, I wouldn't want that being in the paper on me, so whether that's true or not, I don't see how that
What's your feeling about him having a girlfriend that's a dope dealer?
Well, I think obviously if that's true, that's, there's a problem with that.
Okay, what's your feeling about him stealing 3 kilos of cocaine out on the streets and or out of the property?
Right from the get-go, detectives believed somehow Death Row Records was involved.
Phil Carson was committed to this case. I mean, he had made a case. I mean, he was ready to make arrests. He was convinced that Mac and Muhammad and other LAPD officers had been involved in setting up Biggie's murder. He was all the way in on it. He was ready to file, but his superiors, basically blocked him and eventually took him off it. Just like Kenneth Knox, he was right there, ready to make a case. He was told no. So Carson, basically just like Knox, to save his career, backed off. The first and most significant informant in this case, long before Poole or anybody had heard of Amir Mohammed, Mike Robinson, he worked for the sheriffs mostly, and the sheriffs actually handed him over to Poole and Miller. But and they said, this guy has made cases for us. We've gotten murder convictions, almost entirely based on his. At least we wouldn't have gotten them without him. He said right away that he knew the killer was somebody named Amir or Ashmir or something like that.
I've had cases where I've had individuals confess to a crime and I go, no, you didn't do it. I know you didn't do it. Why are you telling me you did it when I know you didn't do it? He said, well, it's because their brother did something to somebody in that gang, and the gang said, you know, you got to make up for your brother, so you got to take the hit on it, and they wouldn't relent. They're actually doing prison time for something they didn't do.
Time and time again, you have people who have information, they're put in a situation that's manufactured to make them look like nuts. Now suddenly they're not credible on the other side. They're not nutty about other things, Board of Inquiries, they're not nutty about Iranians bringing in 60 kilos of cocaine, they're not nuts about any of these other things that are going on. They're cops in some cases.
So I met Wayman, and I started to talk with Wayman and meet with Wayman, me and my partner, and never alone. And I can tell you is that he never ever gave me any bad information, me or my partner.
One of the guys that was from Morella's law firm, they had my case up in Ocean City. They told me if I did not do what they were asking me to do, they had power to switch my case into another courtroom, which they did. I have it to prove it to you. Right after the deposition, the guy who did the deposition from Morella's law firm, I think that's how you pronounce the law firm.
Yeah, Morella.
Whatever they call it.
Morella, yeah.
They sent the deposition within 4 days to Chuck Phillips. I never signed that deposition. I never approved that deposition. But 4 days after I did the deposition, when they were sending it to the LA Times to go to print with it, I contacted Perry Sanders and told him that I did it underneath threat and it was duress and I would never sign it. They were sending me information, trying to put words in my mouth about other articles, and they wanted me to go along with it, saying Perry Sanders offered me money. He never offered me any money. That came from Don Vince's mouth.
Wow.
And then he threatened my son. He told me I would be put in the hole. So this whole thing came from the city attorney. They had a hard-on against Perry Sanders, Mrs. Wallace, and Christopher's estate. They did not like Perry Sanders. They did not want them to get over, they felt, on the city of Los Angeles.
But suddenly when it comes to matters of death row, or it comes to matters of Suge Knight, or it comes to matters of the Wallace investigation or LAPD corruption, these guys are bonkers now. Anybody with half a brain can see what's going on here. Let's suppose for a minute that we say these guys aren't nuts. Let's say we take in face value what these guys had to say. Before they were tampered with, before they were threatened, before Chuck Phillips got to them.
Probably going to write the story by the end of next week. And I just think that would be, if I want to be able to bring that up in the story, but it would be much better to bring it up if you were part of it. You know what I mean? If you just would say, hey, I mean, you don't have to say I can identify the guy. All you have to say is I would go to a line. You know? Because they've not even done that, and they're trying to act like they have done it. You know what I mean? Or that there's no reason to do it.
Yeah, that's a question I'm not going to answer, Jack, one way or another.
Before the LAPD got to them, before they had an opportunity to be dissuaded somehow.
We have been told numerous times by numerous people, including police officers, that they're afraid to come forward.
First, we have to look at what they said originally, then we look at how they were tampered with, because this is witness tampering. Let's call it what it is. These people had reliable information. They had a track record of provable, reliable information. They get tampered with. Now, all of a sudden, they're afraid to talk. Their stories are changing. They're not right about certain facts that they had been absolutely concrete sure of before. And how does that not stink?
And they wanted a gang expert, because there were some gang issues in there, and I've been known and still am as a gang expert in the defense world also. So they called me, and I went down and talked to them about the case and told them, yeah, I'd be glad to work on it with you and be more than happy. So I got retained and started working on it and got into it and found out that, well, I don't understand the gang issues. There's no real gang involvement in this. And I'm basically there as a police practices expert at that time in court. And so they're having discussion and testimony about, you know, informants and things and Kading and all that, and he's up there and testifying whatnot, and then the defense calls me, and I get on the witness stand, and they're asking me, and I said, yeah, this is how you deal with informants. This is a department protocol, and there, you know, there's a manual. There wasn't when I was on, but there is now. And the judge turned over and asked me. He says, well, what is your assessment, or how do you feel that Detective Kading handling of these informants? And I said, he sounded like he was totally out of control and totally out of policy to me, Your Honor. He did not follow the correct procedure. And he goes, okay. And then the judge told the U.S. attorney that I want to see the informant manual. Well, there isn't one, Your Honor. Kading's telling the federal prosecutor there is no such thing. Well, we know there is. And he said, I want that manual in my office in 1 hour. And they went and got it. And so that basically put Kading in a real cross, because he has testified that there is no such thing. And there was. But the federal prosecutor believed Kading that there wasn't anything, and there was. And then you saw exactly what I laid out as to how it's to be handled. Well, come to find out, and I listened to a lot of the tapes of him and his informants. Why he taped himself, I'll never know. Because he's promising these guys houses and money and all these things. I need you to say this, I need you to say, and then I have phone conversations of the informant telling other guys, yeah, all I had to do, I have to say this, and that. I'm at $400 grand. I'm going to get a $500,000 home. I'm going to be living there. I'm going to be living high on the hog. I'm going to be doing it, bro, and all this. And I'm like, you can't promise people anything. You can't. It was that extravagant. You can't buy informants. You can't offer them anything for that. You have to tell them that I can't give you any. I have no authority to give you anything. I would
believe that. If so, you're going to get $500,000 if you testify like that. Who would believe him anyway? I mean, really, are they that gullible?
Well, it was on tape. You didn't have to believe him. It was on tape. That's why I don't understand why he taped himself when he visited these guys alone. He never had a partner with him, and he never had a witness or anything, but he taped himself. He even taped himself on the phone, and I just don't understand the mentality of someone that's a seasoned officer or detective that he knows they're taping this. My understanding is that when the case was, almost all the charges were dismissed. There were some minor bookkeeping things the feds had on Torres, and he got some real tiny conviction on some housekeeping and bookkeeping things or something, and everything else was dismissed. The murder, the drug, all that stuff was all kicked out, was not guilty by jury, and then the judge informed Kading that I don't ever want to know or see or hear of you being in the federal court building, and you're never allowed in my courtroom ever again. And made mention to the U.S. attorney that he feels that they should contact the department and let them know, what had transpired here.
Were you around when they said that?
Yeah.
You were there?
Yeah, and so that's all I know. And I never saw or heard of Kading again.
Right.
I've seen this with other detectives at LAPD on other cases in state court where they were caught in a lie on the witness stand, and the judge whitewashed it as they were just embellishing, they weren't really lying. And then when it gets back to the department, they slap their hand like, well, you can't be in homicide for 3 or 4 weeks, and then he's right back in. It's like nothing happens. Like any public entity, they don't want to take a hit in public that puts the reputation or anything of the department down. And so it's a common practice with just about anywhere. They don't want to take that kind of hit, unless they have to, like, the black eye from Rafael Perez, to where in my era, if I was caught lying on the witness stand, it would have been the end of my career. I would have been fired. They wouldn't have whitewashed, they would have fired me. Because As that point of you lying, you are no longer any use to the department because you cannot testify on any case anymore. You're not trustworthy anymore. They can't use you anymore because you've already lied on the record in a courtroom, and therefore you have no credibility anymore, so therefore they can't use you. But it seemed like nobody cared.
You have to understand that Greg Kading admitted in 2011, and several years after he was off the police department, that he personally had not seen any of the evidence that had been presented in discovery. Well, what was the whole entire nature of the Wallace lawsuit? The entire nature of the Wallace lawsuit was that cops were involved, and that David Mack was involved, and that Rafael Perez was involved, and that Amir Muhammad was involved. That was the entire scope of the Wallace investigation. So if you're a detective and you've seen nothing that puts forward any new evidence or any new information to support that theory, how in the world can you say you've actually investigated it at all?
If you do not include Box B along with Box A, and explain everything in those boxes, of course, you're an incompetent investigator, 1. 2, you're a fraudulent investigator, and you've just disgraced the law enforcement code of ethics.
Greg Kading and some other people that he was affiliated with put that letter online, and then started immediately saying, oh, how ridiculous this is. Oh, here goes RJ Bond again. But again, like I said, nobody really has come back with other than, oh, that's silly.
You haven't considered Box B and the evidence in there. That could refute and change everything. So your investigation is not complete.
I've talked to the U.S. attorneys out here that had that Kading case, and he's like, his name is Mud.
It turns out a few months after the Biggie Smalls killing that there was actually a secret bid auction for helicopters that the Compton Police Department owned. One of the bidders on this secret bid, that was a sealed bid, was the city of Las Vegas. Vegas has to be told to shut up. They have to be hushed, because when they're going to get pinched in a corner, if the FBI rocks over too many cases, they're not going to be able to basically contain what they believe to be the truth about it. And I think that was always the veiled threat. Hey, you push us too hard, we're going to tell about the whole stinking affair. We know it exists. Anybody with half a brain can see what's going on here. And if you really wanted to go in that direction, we can push it that way. That's when Compton said, well, let's change our tact a little bit. Maybe we won't push so hard. Maybe we won't say you guys are dummies. In fact, why don't we give you something nice? Why don't we treat you good? Why don't we give you something that you can turn around and flip and make a little bit of a profit on? The city council just knew that the helicopters were to be declared surplus. The city council has no idea what helicopters do, and they're not in the helicopter business, so they wouldn't know how much these helicopters were worth. And so if you're going to give them away to Vegas, give them away to Vegas. Sure, no problem.
How about the helicopter that went to Vegas? Man, I'm telling you, the night of that meeting, I'm getting the city of Las Vegas budget is damn near $1 billion a year. Our budget is $163 million. And we selling them a helicopter? We had a 4-seat jet helicopter cost $1 million.
And you're talking about a helicopter? Give me a break.
From the looks of it, it doesn't appear that that transaction was actually sanctioned in any kind of a city council or budget meeting in the city of Las Vegas. So that's what we're doing.
So we're looking for records of a helicopter transfer.
If there was an exchange of a helicopter from Compton PD to LVM PD, you're never going to find it in LVM PD. You won't find it. Those documents are destroyed, and that tracking of that money is just about as hard to track that money as it is to the police radio system money. It's non-existent anymore.
It's bought, it stays off the books, and no one has any idea that this helicopter was purchased.
So we hear that they got this brand spanking new $50,000 helicopter engine, and they don't read the instruction manual, and they burn it up right there on the pad. So there's another $50,000 right out the door, and it was right around this same time frame. I'm just wondering if there was some kind of connection.
This wasn't a grand conspiracy, but rather a few individuals that were very good at gaming the system. After Tupac was dead, and having missed their opportunity to kill Suge Knight, the conspirators put him in prison so they could rape and plunder Death Row Records. They were able to sell most of their crimes, leading up to the murders, as a gang thing that was unsolvable. When the narrative didn't gain traction, they elevated the narrative by killing Biggie as an East Coast-West Coast feud that was equally unsolvable. They sold this narrative through Tim Brennan's affidavit. Then they sold it through Chuck Phillips' LA Times articles. As the truth began to emerge in Biggie and Tupac and the Wallace civil trials, they suppressed the truth in the first trial and used Wayman Anderson to sell the narrative and derail the second trial. To galvanize this narrative, they used an ex-LAPD cop to sell it yet again. They'll do anything to obfuscate the truth and sell you this murder as unsolvable, in spite of hundreds of witnesses in very public places, because they are still gaming the system.
I don't take any criticism of the Los Angeles Police Department or any criticism against law enforcement lightly, because my family was a family of cops. My grandfather was on the Los Angeles Police Department. My father was on the Los Angeles Police Department. I knew cops every day, and it makes me sad to think that these people that are involved in these crimes have sullied the reputation of great men and women that are out there, because there are a lot of them out there.
The only way police misconduct can occur is if it is condoned and tolerated by upper police management. That's it. That's the bottom line.
There were no convictions as a result of the Compton PD investigation. There were no convictions for the Tupac Shakur killing. There were no convictions for the Biggie Smalls killing. There were no convictions for the acts of very bad people. And now, the lack of conviction and the lack of prosecution against certain individuals that we know did some really bad things are being used as a rationalization and a justification that they're actually good people. The reality is that Al Capone was never charged with murder. Al Capone was charged with tax evasion. Did it mean there weren't people that were dead as a result of Al Capone? Yeah, there were. But he was never charged with murder. And if that's going to be our rationale as a society, well, I didn't get caught, so it must be okay, then we have a long way to go.
Do it the right way. Reduce to 3 words: be high-minded. 3 more words: remain high-minded. That's the message I want them given to people before, not after, they've faced the first fork in the road. Do I do the right thing today, or do I go off the path? And do I become corrupt today?